Trial resumed. Jury not present.
The court said, "Good morning. Please make your appearances."
Mr. Finkel said, "Good morning, Your Honor, Ryan Finkel and Juliana Murray for the government. We're joined at counsel table by Isabel Loftus and Special Agent Robert Stout."
Mr. Kamraju said, "Good morning, Your Honor, Siddhartha Kamraju, Sabrina Shroff, Matthew Barkin, and Claire Tilton on behalf of Mr. Gov't, who is seated at counsel's table with us."
The court said, "Please have the jurors brought in."
Jury present.
The court said, "Please be seated. Good morning, jurors, and welcome back."
The juror said, "Good morning."
The court said, "We will now continue with the direct examination of Mr. Collins. You may inquire."
Mr. Finkel said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
James Robert Collins, Jr. Resumed. Direct examination. By Mr. Finkel.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
So I remind you, you're still under oath, okay?
Yes.
Mr. Finkel said, "If we can please display for the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 113. Mr. Collins, who is depicted in Government Exhibit 113.
I don't remember his name, but he was held out as the president of the Himalaya Exchange."
Mr. Finkel said, "If we can please display what's in evidence as Government Exhibit BR208A. Can you scroll down, please?" Ms. Loftus, "Can you zoom in on the bottom?" Mr. Collins, "Please take a look at that, and let me know if it refreshes your recollection."
It does.
Mr. Finkel said, "And if we could please go back, Ms. Loftus, to Government Exhibit 113. Who is the individual depicted in Government Exhibit 113?
Jesse Brown."
Mr. Finkel said, "Government offers 113.
Mr. Kamraju said, "No objection."
The court said, "It is admitted."
Government's Exhibit 113 received in evidence.
Mr. Finkel said, "If you could publish that, please." Mr. Collins, you said that this individual, Jesse Brown, was held out as the president of the Himalaya Exchange. Can you explain to the jury what you mean by that?
He represented that was his title. Other team members in the Himalaya Exchange referenced him that way also.
Who?
Jesse Brown.
What did William J., if anything, say about Jesse Brown's role at the Himalaya Exchange?
Other than handing, discussing his title. We didn't have a lot of discussion about Jesse.
Where was Jesse Brown located, to your knowledge?
The British Virgin Islands.
Did you have an understanding about why Mr. Brown was located in the British Virgin Islands?
I believe the type of license they had in the BVI required an officer, if not the main officer, to be located there.
Approximately how many interactions did you have personally with Mr. Brown concerning the Himalaya Exchange?
In a group or just one-on-one?
Either.
All combined, probably 3 or 4.
Who did you primarily interact with regarding the Himalaya Exchange?
William J.E., Georgetta Donis Roberts, and Priya Patel.
The court said, "Mr. Finkel, if you would get closer to the microphone, please."
Mr. Finkel said, "Yes, Your Honor." And Mr. Collins, what was your understanding of who ran the Himalaya Exchange?
It is clear to me that William J.E. was running the business.
And why was it clear to you that William J.E. was running the Himalaya Exchange?
People deferred to him ultimately on pretty much any decision that was made around Himalaya Exchange.
Mr. Finkel said, "If we can please display Government Exhibit 103. Mr. Collins, did there come a time, if ever, where you met Mr. J. in person?
Yes.
And where did you meet him?
I met him in their offices just outside of London.
Whose offices just outside of London?
Himalaya Exchange.
And when, approximately, was that?
Approximately the fall of 21.
And can you describe, please, to the jury the nature of your conversation with Mr. J. about the Himalaya Exchange in his London offices?
He was excited to tell us about their offering. They were just in the midst of launching the Himalaya coin and the Himalaya dollar, which was both listed on the exchange. He was very much engaged in taking advantage of the market interest in digital assets. And they held out this exchange as being the next big thing.
What do you mean he was interested in taking advantage of the market in digital assets at that time?
There was a lot of interest generically, publicly, globally, in investing in digital assets.
And when you say digital assets, based on your understanding in the fall of 2021, can you give some examples?
Well, the biggest digital asset and perhaps the most notable is Bitcoin. The market is often referred to as crypto. Ethereum is another coin. There's I think currently 20,000 different coins listed.
At the time that you had this meeting with Mr. J in London, had you heard of the Himalaya coin?
No.
Had you heard of the Himalaya dollar?
No.
And to your knowledge at that time, was the Himalaya coin or Himalaya dollar available on any other cryptocurrency exchange?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did you have any conversations with Mr. J at that time about Miles Gua?
I believe I mentioned that we had informed their staff that we had concerns about Miles's profile. And I asked him to confirm that Miles's money wasn't involved in the accounts that we would be onboarding. And that Miles was not in any way a control person of the enterprises.
And what did Mr. J say in response to your request for confirmation that Miles Gua was not in any way a control person of the enterprise?
He confirmed that Miles was not a UBO or that his money was being used in the exchange.
The court said, "What does UBO mean?"
The witness said, ultimate beneficial owner. Is sort of a Bank Secrecy Act term of art.
Did Mr. J explain anything about whether the Himalaya dollar was backed by gold?
He did not mention that.
Did you meet with an individual named Priya Patel when you were in London?
Yes.
Who is Priya Patel?
Priya Patel was held out as the most senior legal officer of the company.
Which company?
The ones I know about are Hamilton, the various funds run by Hamilton, and the Himalaya Exchange.
What is your understanding of what Hamilton was?
There were several different entities that utilized the name Hamilton. So for example, Hamilton Special Opportunities Fund, that collection of Hamilton entities generally was, from my understanding, investment vehicles that were investing William and his investors' money.
And what was your understanding of who ran the Hamilton entities?
William.
William, what's the last name?
William J.E.
Did you review, well withdrawn? Mr. Finkel said, Ms. Loftus, if we can play for the witness and the jury what's in evidence, but outside of trial director. Please, GXC 370V, play just a few seconds of that, please.
Video displayed.
Mr. Finkel said, can you pause that, please?
By Mr. Finkel.
Mr. Collins. Around the time that Mercantile Bank was considering onboarding the Himalaya Exchange as a client. Did you watch this video?
I watched a few videos. This seems familiar.
Mr. Finkel said, you could play it, please, Ms. Loftus.
Video displayed.
Mr. Finkel said, you can stop there. Mr. Collins, at the time you watched this video, what was your reaction to it, if any?
I saw it as pure marketing. I didn't really have a strong reaction one way or the other.
In making a decision to onboard a client, does Mercantile Bank consider marketing of a client?
Sometimes.
Did you in this case?
I believe we did holistically, in conjunction with my Bank Secrecy Act team.
Mr. Collins, there is a phrase in this video that we just watched that says, "To the moon." Did you see that and hear that?
Yes.
Are you familiar with that phrase? To the moon.
I mean, it's from an old black and white TV series, but yes.
What about in the context of cryptocurrency? Are you familiar with the phrase, to the moon?
Somewhat.
What does it mean?
It means that the price will go infinitely high.
And is that a phrase that people in the cryptocurrency community use? To the moon!
I've heard it before.
Mr. Finkel said, "We can take that down, Ms. Loftus." Mr. Collins, did ultimately Mercantile Bank take on the Himalaya Exchange as a client?
Yes.
And approximately how many bank accounts did the Himalaya Exchange open with your bank?
I don't recall the specific number, but somewhere between 4 and 6.
And when you took on the Himalaya Exchange as a client, did you believe the Himalaya Exchange was a legitimate business?
Yes.
Did Mercantile Bank store gold for the Himalaya Exchange?
No.
Did there come a time, if ever, when G clubs transferred money into a Himalaya Exchange bank account?
I believe so.
Mr. Finkel said, "If we can please display for the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit MER 1203. Do you see it on your monitor, Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Please take a look at that, and let me know what Government Exhibit MER 1203 is."
Can I read it from the bottom up?
Sure.
There we go. That's good. Okay.
What is MER 1203?
This is me facilitating a movement from G Club to the Himalaya Exchange.
And who is making that request for the movement?
Alex H.
And he works for what company, based on your understanding?
G Club.
Mr. Finkel said, "Government offers MER 1203.
Mr. Kamaraju said, no objection.
The court said, "It is admitted."
Government's Exhibit MER 1203 received in evidence.
Mr. Finkel said, "Could we publish that, please, Ms. Loftus?" You can scroll to the bottom while that's coming up. Mean?
The court said, "Sir, when you say a movement, what do you?"
The witness said, "A wire transfer."
The court said, "If you would speak up, please."
The witness said, "A wire transfer. By Mr. Finkel."
Mr. Collins, can you read the email at the top of your screen, December 1st, 2021? From Alex H. to Georgette and you, beginning with, "I was told."
Okay.
Can you read that, please?
You want me to read the email?
Yeah, from "I was told."
Out loud?
Yes, please.
Okay. I was told the account is open and ready to accept funds. Can you please share the wire information for Himalaya International Clearing Limited account at Mercantile so I may schedule transfer of $50 million US?
Mr. Finkel said, "If we can scroll up, please." And what do you say in response to that email?
Would you like me to facilitate this? I don't want to share your account number's details with him without your approval. That was my comment to Georgette.
Mr. Finkel said, "If we can scroll up again, please, Ms. Loftus." And after Georgette responds, "This will need to be facilitated through the CFO." Mr. Collins, can you read what you wrote back?
Sounds good. John, can you work with Masud for this authorization, communicating to directly G Club the wiring instructions with Himalaya's account number, so that G Club can move money from the G Club account to the Himalaya account that is already open for their purchase of coins?
Mr. Finkel said, "If we can please display for the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit MER 1204. Did there come a time, if ever?" Mr. Collins, while that's coming up, that Mr. J asked for help with what he called VIP clients?
Yes.
Can you see that document on your screen, sir?
It's just a header, yes.
Mr. Finkel said, "Can you scroll down, please, Ms. Loftus?" Mr. Collins, what is this document, MER 1204?
It looks like a series of messages between me and William.
Mr. Finkel said, "Government offers MER 1204.
Mr. Kamaraju said, no objection.
The court said, "It is admitted."
Government's Exhibit MER 1204 received in evidence.
Mr. Finkel said, "If we could publish that, please." Mr. Collins, what's the month and year of these messages between you and Mr. J.E.?
March of 2022.
And can you read your third message at 5:45 p.m. on March 17, 2022?
There is no universe that I will be carrying 100 mil of BTC on a thumb drive to Dubai.
What is BTC?
That's the acronym for Bitcoin.
Why did you write, "There is no universe that I will be carrying 100 mil of BTC Bitcoin on a thumb drive to Dubai"? Why did you send that to William J.E.?
In a discussion about when we were having these messages, William asked me the question if I'd be open to that.
Open to what?
Carrying $100 million of BTC on a thumb drive.
Did he provide any information? Did William J.E. provide any information why he wanted you to do that?
No.
Why did you decline?
There's many reasons. Perhaps first and foremost is my personal safety, second is that would sidestep every single BSI or BSA requirement. And I'm pretty sure I don't remember when laws were exactly passed. But it may have been a felony to transmit or to carry more than $10,000 of value across the border without disclosing it.
So you declined?
Yes.
Mr. Finkel said, "Okay. We can scroll down, please, Ms. Loftus." Right there. So on March 17, 2022, at 11:38 p.m., can you read what William J. messaged you?
I'm sorry. At what time?
11:38 p.m.
You want me to read it?
Yes, please.
Hi, could you help to check if the below account has been opened? If not, any outstanding issue? UK Himalaya Limited Director, Jianfeng Dai. His email, and then he says thanks.
Do you know who David Dai is?
I don't recall that person.
What was your understanding of why William J. was asking you about this individual, Mr. Dai?
I don't recall that we really spoke about him. I think he is the signatory for UK Himalaya Limited. And that would have, I'm not sure we ever discussed the purpose of that operating entity's account.
Mr. Finkel said, "We can take that down." Mr. Collins, did there come a time, if ever, when William J. asked for your help in making a money transfer related to a loan?
Yes.
And when approximately was that?
I remember it around Easter of 22.
And what did Mr. J. tell you about this loan?
The loan was being made to an escrow account related to the bankruptcy of Mr. Gov't, a security for a substantial piece of collateral that they had moved from the United States to the Mediterranean. Being a large yacht. And the loan was to satisfy the court's demand in time because they didn't have time to steam the yacht back to America. And it was a short-term loan to facilitate Mr. Govt's freedom.
What do you mean by that?
I was told that if the loan wasn't facilitated right away, that he would be imprisoned.
Mr. Gov't?
Yes.
And Mr. J. told you that?
Yes.
And what was the collateral? Can you explain how that works and your understanding of it, based on this conversation with Mr. J.
So in the normal lending arrangement, the lender will take collateral as security for the loan, so if the loan doesn't get repaid, they can foreclose on that collateral and sell it to pay the loan.
And so what was the issue with collateral being moved out of the country? Can you explain that?
My understanding, I'm not an attorney. But the bankruptcy trustee was upset that some significant assets of the estate had been moved outside of USA jurisdictional reach.
Whose estate?
Mr. Govt's.
Bankruptcy attorney for what bankruptcy?
Mr. Govt's.
What kind of asset was moved out of the jurisdiction, based on your understanding from the conversation?
The yacht.
What yacht?
I don't remember the name of it.
And so how would this loan sort of solve Mr. J. and Mr. Govt's problem?
Mr. Kamraju said, objection.
The court said, sustained.
How would this loan facilitate this issue, based on what Mr. J. told you?
Mr. Kamraju said, same objection.
The court said, sustained. Was there a request for a loan?
The witness said, "The request was not a loan from me. The loan that was being made was by William J.E. and one of his companies to a relative of Miles Gov't, who I think was listed as the owner at the bank. But the trustee had identified this yacht as a substantial asset of the estate. By Mr. Finkel."
So what was Mercantile's role with respect to this potential loan, if it wasn't a loan from you?
We were just wiring money under the control of William J.E. to the escrow account of an attorney involved in the case.
And the William J.E. account, do you know what business it was associated with?
I vaguely remember it was one of the Himalaya entities, but I don't recall specifically.
And when you say Himalaya entities, entities of what?
One of the Himalaya companies that had an account with us.
Meaning the Himalaya Exchange?
Yes.
At the time, did this seem like a reasonable business transaction?
It was unusual, but it seemed reasonable.
And you said that there was a woman involved in the process?
Yes, I don't recall. I didn't see the actual title work to the yacht. But my understanding was the loan was made to the bankruptcy I don't remember who the signatory of the loan was, but it was somebody I'd never met before. It was held out as a relative of Miles Gov't, whose name I think was actually on the yacht title.
And did Mercantile Bank facilitate this wire payment from the Himalaya entity to an escrow account for this loan?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Finkel said, government offers, pursuant to the, may I have a second?
Counsel conferring.
Mr. Finkel said, pursuant to a stipulation regarding bank record documents, the government offers GXMER 138.
Mr. Kamaraju said, "No objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "It is admitted."
Government's Exhibit MER 138 received in evidence. By Mr. Finkel.
By the way, Mr. Collins, what did William J.E. tell you, if anything, about the nature of his relationship with Miles Gov't?
Do you have a specific point in time in mind or?
In general.
He mentioned that Miles Gov't was his best friend. That Miles trusted him more than any individual in the world, and that they were very close.
Can you see on your screen Government Exhibit MER 138? I think it's published, but...
Yeah.
What type of document is this? You recognize the formatting?
Looks like a monthly statement from Mercantile Bank.
And what's the name of the entity whose monthly statement this is?
Himalaya International Financial Group Limited.
And is that one of the Himalaya/William J. accounts?
Yes.
And do you see where in the amount it says minus 37 million?
Yes.
What is that?
I believe that's the amount that we wired related to the yacht and the loan in the escrow account.
And it also says Zeisler and Zeisler, PCILTA account. Do you see that?
Yes.
What is your understanding of what that means, Zeisler and Zeisler, PCILTA account?
That's the escrow account I've been referencing.
And so the $37 million wire was the loan that you spoke about prior.
That was a loan William and Himalaya made to Miles Gov't.
After the loan was processed, what reaction, if any, did Mr. J. have?
I just want to correct what I just said. I don't know the loan was made to Miles Gov't. It was related to Miles Govt's bankruptcy estate, but technically I think the loan was made to another person.
Okay. What was Mr. J.'s reaction after this wire was processed, if any?
His reaction after it was processed? I think he was grateful that we were able to process this so quickly.
Mr. Finkel said, "You can take that down, Ms. Loftus." Aside from the business that the Himalaya Exchange had with Mercantile Bank, what other business discussions, if any, did you have with William J.E.?
Maybe you can narrow that question down for me.
Did you contemplate entering into a business transaction with Mr. J. aside from opening accounts at Mercantile Bank?
Yes.
What was the nature of that transaction?
We discussed early in the relationship. Investing in the exchange, I'm sorry, in our bank, technically our holding company, which he did, initial investment. And then that conversation grew to much larger conversation about essentially buying a controlling interest in the bank.
I'm sorry. Who was that who was contemplating buying a controlling interest in the bank?
William J.E., through one of his entities called I think Hamilton Special Opportunities Fund.
And when you say the bank, you mean Mercantile?
Yes.
How far advanced did those negotiations get about selling a controlling interest in Mercantile Bank to William J.E.'s company?
They resulted in an actual closing on September 16th, according to what we had agreed to. The terms.
And what was the approximate price that Mr. J.E. was willing to pay for a controlling interest in Mercantile?
Ultimately, he would be investing almost $100 million. The first tranche was $49.5 million.
Is there a regulator who regulates Mercantile Bank?
Yes.
And what's the name of that regulator?
Our prudential regulator, if you will, is a firm who's most easily referenced as their acronym, called OCIF. It's the agency. The Banking Agency of Puerto Rico.
In connection with the potential purchase of Mercantile Bank by William J. Was Mr. J. required to make any representations to OCIF?
Yes.
About Miles Gua?
About many things, but
were some of those representations that Mr. J. was required to make to OCF about Miles Gua?
Yes.
And what did Mr. J. represent to OCF about Miles Gua, if anything?
That Miles was not a UBO. That none of the money involved in the fund that was actually making the investment was part of Miles Gua's money or estate.
To your knowledge, did he make those representations?
Yes.
When was this transaction supposed to close, the sale of Mercantile to Hamilton Special Opportunities?
The original closing date was set for August 24th, and we had to extend that to September 16th.
The court said, of what year?
The witness said, of 2022.
Did the transaction close on September 16th of 2022?
Yes.
Did Mercantile receive final payment on September 16th, 2022?
No.
How much was Mercantile expecting to receive on September 16th, 2022?
$49.5 million.
Why did Mercantile not obtain $49.5 million on September 16th, 2022?
Why didn't we receive it?
Yeah.
The money was seized in transit by the U.S. Marshals.
And how did you learn about that?
Well,
at first,
the wire was initiated on a Friday afternoon in the United States. And we weren't surprised that it hadn't cleared that day just because it was late in the day. So Monday, we were looking for the wire. We were in London at the time. And the wire wasn't showing up. It didn't show up on Tuesday. I think by Wednesday, we realized that there was some sort of problem.
Did you speak with Mr. J about the potential problem?
Yes.
And what did he say?
He said they hadn't had any communications from their banks. That they didn't have any knowledge about why the wire had not cleared, and I asked them to look into it. And I also asked them if I could look into it.
Did you?
I did.
What did you learn?
I happen to know the CEO of Silvergate Bank, which is where the wire initiated from. So I called him, and we had a brief conversation, wondering where the wire was, and he didn't know anything about it. So he said he would look into it. And the next day, I got an email from him saying that he was not in a position to discuss the account any further and that I should ask the account owners to contact them immediately.
Did you do that?
I did.
What happened next?
William and Priya reached out to them. I think they had a phone call. And it was then that it was revealed that the wire had been seized.
After the seizure, did Mr. J make any requests concerning the Himalaya exchange?
I mean, there were many conversations and several requests. So maybe you could narrow it down for me.
Sure. Mr. Finkel said, if we can display for the witness what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit MER 1205. If you can scroll down so Mr. Collins can take a look at this, please. What is MER 1205, this document, Mr. Collins?
This is a series of WhatsApp communications between me and William J.E.
What's the date?
September 23, 2022.
Mr. Finkel said, Government offers MER 1205.
Mr. Kamaraju said, no objection.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit MER 1205 received in evidence.
Mr. Finkel said, could we publish that, please? And we can zoom in at the top, please, Ms. Loftus. That's fine.
By Mr. Finkel.
So the first message says, I will speak to Mossad at 11. Is that correct? That's from you?
Yes.
Who is Mossad?
Ehsan Mossad was held out as the CFO of Himalaya Exchange.
And why did you ask, is he aware of what is happening?
For me, these are incredibly unusual circumstances. And I didn't want to be in a position of saying something out of place with the wrong person at the wrong time. Partly because of commercial liability. And so I just wanted to understand what Ehsan understood about what was happening around them. Because it was a very confusing time, there was a lot of information flowing around that was extreme. And I just wanted to be careful.
Continued on the next page. By Mr. Finkel.
I'm just going to ask you to move the mic somewhat down a bit so everyone can hear you. Mr. Collins. When you said aware of what is happening, what does the what refer to?
Several things. That Silvergate funds were frozen or seized. We had learned that FV Bank, another bank that we were familiar with, had also had a major seizure related to the Himalaya universe. And we didn't know what else was out there. Generically, I would just say, my question was, is he aware of what's happening related to the seizures? Because even the most senior executives were not necessarily aware in real time.
And then a couple of messages below, William J. at 9:03 a.m. says, we are just doing normal redemption of a client. Thanks. Did I read that right?
Yes.
What was your understanding of what that meant?
A redemption typically means that they were substituting HDO for cash or HCN for cash.
Why, based on your understanding, was Mr. J.E. talking about a normal redemption of a client at this time?
Mr. Kamaraju said, objection.
The court said, you may state what your understanding of the statement was.
Well, my understanding is that he wanted to redeem, at this point in time. That he wanted to redeem one of the coins on the Himalaya exchange for US dollars related to a normal client.
At that time after the seizure first, did Mr. J.E. identify who that client was?
Not at first.
How did he describe that client at first, Mr. J.E.?
He described him as well, he just said a normal redemption of a client. And I believe later he mentioned it was a VIP client.
And what was the amount of the redemption that Mr. J.E. sought for this client shortly after the seizure from the banks that you mentioned?
Somewhere between $42 and $50,000 to $50 million.
Did Mr. J.E. provide documents to facilitate this redemption to Mercantile Bank?
Yes.
The court said, in a redemption, the money goes from where to where?
The witness said, I would say there's a nomenclature problem here in the sense that what he's calling a redemption here, we would think of as a trade, so he is selling his HCN for US dollars. He's calling it a redemption because they happen to control the platform, and so they can redeem it by picking a value. But later I believe they sent us what we would call trade confirmations that actually show that it's more similar to a trade than a redemption.
To redeem, if a redemption or trade is going to be processed, what sort of the real-world event that Mercantile would facilitate?
Well, our role in what he's referring to as redemption is simply the wiring of the money. We're not involved in the transaction. We're not involved in the mechanics of the redemption. We just respond to the request. We ask for supporting documentation because that fulfills our Bank Secrecy Act requirements.
If we can take that down, Ms. Loftus, and display for the witness what's been marked as Government Exhibit MER5 and MER6 for the witness. Mr. Collins. Who signed these documents?
William J.E.
What are these documents?
These are what I would call a trade confirmation.
And does this pertain to the trade we were just discussing?
Yes.
Mr. Finkel said, Government offers MER5 and 6.
Mr. Kamaraju said, no objection.
The court said, they are admitted.
Government's exhibits MER5 and MER6 received in evidence. By Mr. Finkel.
Can we publish, please, Ms. Loftus? Mr. Collins. What is your understanding about why Mercantile was provided these two documents that you said were trade confirmations?
I presume this was part of our document collection related to our compliance function.
And on the left side of the screen, it says seller sales 1,308,000 and some more HCN at 24.46 per HCN. Seller receives 32 million HEO. Do you see that?
Yes.
What was your understanding of what that meant?
That meant the seller, which is listed just below. It says the name of the seller account William K. J.E. at acap.com was selling HDOs. I'm sorry. He was selling HCN in exchange for HDO.
And what was HDO described to you as?
A stable dollar. I'm sorry, a stable coin.
What was the price of HDO described to you as?
The price was always equal to 1. Because it was backed 1-to-1 by the stables, I'm sorry, by the US dollar.
And HCN was described to you as what?
HCN is a digital asset that is more akin to a true crypto coin like Bitcoin.
And that's how it was described to you?
Yes.
So by selling this HCN, it says seller receives 32 million HDO. What's the US dollar value of that?
$32 million.
And then seeing the name of the seller account. Did that provide any information to Mercantile about who this VIP client was?
I believe our compliance department would have picked up on it at the time.
And so who was this VIP client that Mr. J.E. said he was helping redeem?
It's William K. Well, it's either William J.E. or a firm called ACA Capital.
And the document on the right side of the screen, where it says seller sells 572,000 and change at HCN. Seller receives 14 million HDO. What is your understanding of the US dollar value of that 14 million HDO?
14 million.
So 32 million plus 14 million is how much?
46 million.
Is that the amount of money William J.E. was requesting to be transferred shortly after the bank seizure?
Yes.
Upon learning that the client for this transfer, this redemption, was William J.E. or ACA Cap, what reaction did you have to that, if any?
I don't recall a specific reaction other than being annoyed that it wasn't forthcoming from the beginning.
That what wasn't forthcoming?
That this was an account controlled by him.
That who just said this was an account?
I'm sorry, William J.E.
Ms. Loftus, if we can please put back up MER 1205. Can we go to the next page, please? Can you zoom in from the 9:03 a.m. line? At 9:03 a.m. Mr. J.E. says, we are just doing normal redemption of a client, correct?
Yes.
What was your understanding of that redemption referred to what transaction, if any?
The transaction we just reviewed.
And a few lines down at 12:31 p.m. Mr. J.E. says, what documents you need for ACA? I can send you all. Do you see that, sir?
Yes.
What's your understanding of why Mr. J.E. was asking what documents you needed for ACA?
Mr. Kamaraju said, objection.
The court said, I'll allow the question.
Can you ask the question again?
What was your understanding why Mr. J.E. was asking you what documents you, Mr. Collins, needed for ACA?
William knew that we ran a rigorous compliance function. And in order for us to send a transaction of that size, we would have to do what we would call KYC on the receiver as well as the sender, which we had already done.
The court said, "What do you mean by KYC?"
The witness said, "I'm sorry, a know your customer. It's a reference to being sure that you understand the bona fides of who's receiving $50 million, well, 46.
At this time, what was your understanding of what ACA was?
I had come across ACA in some news articles early on in the relationship and didn't know much about it other than it was an entity facilitated with William J.E. So that's all.
At the time you were having this conversation, September 23, 2022, shortly after the bank seizure, the wire seizure, were you contemplating processing this transaction that Mr. J.E. was requesting?
No.
Why not?
It was clear that something was amiss. At that point in time, we counted approximately $1.2 billion that had been seized by the U.S. government between two other banks.
Mr. Collins, why then were you requesting documentation from Mr. J.E. if you weren't going to process this transfer?
Well, we have a commercial responsibility to consider request, and we were doing that.
If we can scroll down a little bit, please, Ms. Loftus. At 1:37 p.m., can you read what Mr. J. wrote?
1:37 p.m.?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I could send you all the documents to show that I own ACA. Do you still need to go through your portal? We need the execution today, or it is meaningless.
At the time, what was your understanding of why it had to be executed today, or it was meaningless?
I had no understanding of that. I was confused by the term.
Why were you confused by the term? Meaningless?
Because from my perspective, it didn't appear meaningless.
Can we scroll down some more, Ms. Loftus? Can you read what Mr. J. wrote at 4:03 p.m. on September 23, 2022?
Send you all the ACA stuff. I have some updated information in Hong Kong. But I think the information is more than enough. We are just redeeming.
What did you understand the term to mean? Just redeeming?
They were liquidating their holdings for dollars.
And then at 4:50 p.m., can you read what Mr. J. wrote?
Masood does not know about ACA. If any questions, call me. Thanks.
Can you read what Mr. J. wrote at 8:12 p.m. on that same day, September 23rd?
Please let me know if you need further information. We are redeeming and need to be done today. It is meaningless.
After the wire was seized, did Mr. J. explain to you what the urgency was with respect to this redemption?
No.
You can take that down. If we can display, please, what's been marked as Government Exhibit MER8. By the way, in any of those messages that we just looked at, did Mr. J. blame the Chinese Communist Party for the troubles he was having with banking?
I don't recall.
Can you see on your screen MER8?
Yes.
Take a look at that document. Who signed it?
William J.E.
What is this document?
This looks like it's called a redemption request form. But it's really a request to wire funds.
Mr. Finkel said, Government offers MER8.
Mr. Kamaraju said, no objection.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit MER8 received in evidence. By Mr. Finkel.
You said it's a redemption request form, but it's really what?
It's a request to transfer funds to a bank called First Abu Dhabi Bank.
And what is the account holder of the First Abu Dhabi Bank account?
ACA Capital Group Limited.
Where is First Abu Dhabi Bank located?
Abu Dhabi in the UAE.
You can zoom out of that. It says at the bottom HDO redemption amount. You see that?
Yes.
That amount 46 million HDO. What is your understanding at that time of how much in US dollars that was worth?
$46 million.
And this 46 million. Does it pertain to the transaction documents that we've looked at in the chats you were having with Mr. J at the time?
Yes.
What effect, if any, did the fact that Mr. J's request to send this $46 million to the Middle East have on you as a banker?
I'm sorry. Could you ask the question again?
The fact that Mr. J was requesting the $46 million be sent to Abu Dhabi after this wire seizure related to this redemption for a client he didn't identify at first. What effect did that have on you in your consideration whether to process this wire?
Mr. Kamraju said, objection, form and compound.
The court said, sustained. It's compound.
What effect did the fact that Mr. J was requesting you send this wire to Abu Dhabi have on consideration whether to process it as a banker?
It felt uncomfortable. It appeared to be an attempt to move money outside of the jurisdiction of the United States. We're not clear on the various agreements between UAE and the United States. But it's known to be a jurisdiction that doesn't always cooperate with seizures.
Did you process the wire?
No.
We can display what's been marked for identification as MER 1206. Go to the next page, please, Ms. Loftus. Can you zoom in so Mr. Collins can see it? Thank you. What is this document?
This is more messages between me and William.
Mr. Finkel said, Government offers MER 1206.
Mr. Kamraju said, no objection, Your Honor.
The court said, it is admitted.
Mr. Finkel said, if we could publish that, please.
Government's Exhibit MER 1206 received. By Mr. Finkel.
If we could publish that, please. What's the date of these messages?
September 24th, 2022.
Can you read Mr. J's message to you at 11:14 p.m.?
Yes. Hi, Bo, Renee, Priya and our lawyer spoke today. Our lawyer's negotiating with the DOJ and releasing the fund's money to complete the transaction. We need a simple letter from your bank to show that you will suffer if the deal did not go through. If you want to inform the PMA on the matter, we are okay. I can assure you that none of the money comes from Miles and our independent fund administrator. Our internal compliance and the banking regulator have verified this already. Renee seems to doubt about this and even asked our lawyers on this. This will jeopardize our relationship with our lawyer.
Who is Renee?
Renee Carson is the general counsel of MGH and MBI.
Meaning Mercantile?
Yes.
What's the nature of your relationship with Renee Carson aside from her being the general counsel?
She's my wife.
And then here it says, want to inform PMA. What's PMA?
PMA is a law firm based in Puerto Rico that represented Hamilton Opportunity Fund.
What was your understanding of what Mr. J meant when he messaged you? Renee seems to doubt about this, and even asked our lawyers on this. This will jeopardize our relationship with our lawyer?
He was responding to my message above that says, I'm shocked at what I just heard. Which was that he didn't want us giving notice, which we were required to give in our commercial agreement, of the closing of any sort of default. So he did not want us communicating with PMA about the circumstances of this event.
Who is he? Who's the he?
William and Priya did not want us communicating with their attorneys about the circumstances of this event.
When you say this event, what do you mean?
The seizures.
Did Mr. J explain to you why he didn't want Mercantile communicating with J's lawyers about the seizure?
He wrote in the bottom that it would jeopardize our relationship with our lawyer.
Did J explain why the seizure would jeopardize their relationship with their lawyer?
He didn't offer me details.
In this message, Mr. J also requests a simple letter from your bank Mercantile to show that you will suffer if the deal did not go through. What was your understanding of what that meant?
They were representing to us that they were in daily communication with the DOJ at that point. That they were requesting at a minimum the $49.5 million be released because it was injuring a third party and they wanted us to validate that.
Did Mercantile provide a letter?
I believe so.
and below that it says, I can assure you that none of the money comes from Miles and our independent fund administrator. What is your understanding of who Miles refers to?
Miles Gway.
Did Mercantile receive a warrant, a seizure warrant from the U.S. government?
Initially we received a freeze and then later a seizure.
What's a freeze?
A freeze means we can't move the money anywhere.
And what accounts did the freeze pertain to?
I believe all the accounts related to William J.E.
And then you said you received a seizure. What's the difference between a seizure and a freeze?
A seizure means that we actually wire the money to the U.S. Marshal Office, and it becomes under the custody of the United States.
Did Mercantile do that? Did Mercantile transfer the Himalayan money to the United States government?
Yes.
Did Mercantile retain any of the money that was in the Himalaya and G Club accounts?
Yes.
Why?
We have commercial provisions in our contracts that allow us to offset for compliance and legal fees related to an account.
As a result of that, did you have a legal dispute with Hamilton?
I don't recall a legal dispute on that issue, but I'm fuzzy on that.
Did you have any legal dispute with Hamilton, you meaning Mercantile?
Yeah. Actually, I don't think we have any, other than we filed for an arbitration.
What do you mean by you, Mercantile?
Mercantile Global Holdings.
Why did Mercantile file for an arbitration?
Because they defaulted on the closing requirements.
Who is they?
Hamilton Special Opportunity Fund.
Is there also an arbitration with G Club?
I believe there is one pending that's been stayed.
Mr. Finkel said, "One moment. Nothing further at this time. Thank you, Mr. Collins."
The court said, cross-examination.
Mr. Kamraju said, "Thank you, Your Honor. Just for planning purpose, are we taking the morning break at 11 or 11:30?
The court said, 11:30 will be our half-an-hour break, and then we'll take another break at 2:30.
Mr. Kamraju said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
Cross-examination. By Mr. Kamraju.
Good morning, Mr. Collins.
Good morning.
Now, could we bring up Government Exhibit MR 1205, please, which is in evidence. Now. Mr. Finkel asked you some questions about this on direct, correct?
I presume so. I only see a header.
We could scroll through real quick so you can take a look.
Yes, this is what we discussed.
And this was the exchange of WhatsApp messages about the redemption request, correct?
Yes.
And you testified on direct that that redemption request never happened, right? Withdrawn. You testified on direct that you never wired any money pursuant to this redemption request, correct?
We did not.
In fact, you were never intending to wire any money pursuant to this redemption request, correct?
That's correct.
Could we go to page 3 of the document, please? Do you see a message there from Mr. J.E. at 9:03 p.m.? The second from the bottom.
Hi, please hold until Monday.
He's referring to this redemption request, right?
Yes.
And you had never told him that you didn't intend to honor this redemption request, right?
I never told him that.
So, in fact, Mr. J.E. called it off on his own accord, correct?
Yes.
And that was before you processed it, correct?
Yes.
We can take that down for a second. Now. The transaction that you described between Hamilton and Mercantile Bank. That was for Hamilton to acquire a stake in the bank, right?
Technically the holding company that wholly owns the bank, but yes.
So indirectly buying the bank by buying an interest in the holding company, right?
Right.
You testified on direct, I believe that transaction closed September 16th of 2022, right?
Yes.
And prior to the transaction closing, you had to receive authorization for something you called OCIF?
Correct.
You made an application to OCIF, correct?
I think technically the application was made by William J.E. and Hamilton Special Opportunity Fund.
Did Mercantile not have any submission to the OCIF as part of it?
I don't recall what was required. We had attorneys handling it, both inside and outside counsel.
You understood that in connection with that application, it was going to the entity that regulated your bank, right?
Correct.
And so it was important to you to honor your commitments to that regulator, correct?
Correct.
And in fact you said that to Mr. J.E. on several occasions, right?
Yes.
And you didn't want to be associated, withdrawn. You didn't want your regulator to associate you with any kind of misconduct, right?
Correct.
That would have a negative impact on your bank, right?
Correct.
And that application that went in, whether it was for Hamilton or Mercantile, that went in April of 2022. Right?
That sounds about right.
And that's right around Easter of that year, right?
Yeah, I don't recall the specific dates.
But that is around the time that the loan went in, right?
Correct.
Now, could we pull up Government Exhibit MER 1204, please? And this is in evidence so we can put it up for the jury.
It's just a header for me.
I'm going to have it scrolled through once the jury can see it. Okay. So could we just scroll through that so the witness can take a look at it? Do you recall testifying about this exchange of messages on direct?
Yes.
And you remember Mr. Finkel asking you questions about this line. There is no universe that I will be carrying 100 million of BTC on a thumb drive to Dubai, right?
Yes.
You sent that message on March 17, 2022, correct?
Yes.
So that's before you submitted the OCIF application, correct?
Could you tell me the date of the OCIF submission? I don't recall it.
Sure. Maybe we can put up side by side with this defense, actually. Let's take this down and just for the witness put up DX 60554. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is this the application?
It appears to be a letter to OCIF. If you could reduce it back. That describes the transaction. Can we go down the letter so I can see the whole thing?
Sure.
Okay. That's signed by Hamilton's counsel.
Before we do that, is this the application?
I believe this is the application that Hamilton submitted.
And this was the application submitted to OCIF?
Yes.
And it's in connection with the Mercantile/Hamilton transaction?
Yes. Honor.
Mr. Kumraju said, the defense offers DX 60554, your.
Mr. Finkel said, I have a question for clarification. This is Hamilton's application?
The witness said, I'm unclear. We can look at the last page. We went through it very fast. By Mr. Kumraju.
How about you just blow up the first paragraph just for the witness?
So that is a request for the approval.
I'm sorry. I meant the very first paragraph.
That paragraph, I'm not trying to be pedantic. But it describes that we are requesting approval for this transaction, but that is not necessarily the application. I think there's a distinction.
Understood. Is this a letter submitted to OCIF in connection with the application related to the Mercantile/Hamilton transaction?
Yes.
Is it a letter submitted on behalf of your bank?
I believe so.
Mr. Kumraju said, the defense offers DX 60554.
Can I look at the signatories again? I'm a little confused on that.
Feel free.
Yeah, so, it's signed by our counsel and Hamilton's counsel. So that may be perhaps why I don't recall the letter, but okay.
The court said, is there any objection?
Mr. Finkel said, yes. Objection, hearsay, authenticity, couple of things.
Mr. Kumraju said, I'm not offering it for the contents of the letter. I'm simply offering it for the fact that it was submitted.
The court said, You're not offering it for the contents, but merely for the fact that the letter was submitted?
Mr. Kamaraju said, yes.
The court said, it is admitted.
Defendant's Exhibit 60554 received in evidence.
Mr. Kamaraju said, could we publish that?
Mr. Finkel said, can I ask one question? Have you seen this letter before?
The witness said, I don't recall seeing it by memory.
Mr. Finkel said, I renew the objection.
The court said, I'm going to permit the letter.
Can we publish it, please? So you see the date of this, it's April 18th, 2022.
Yes.
So it's fair to say that at this time as of this date you were still pursuing the transaction with Hamilton. Correct?
Yes.
So now if we could go back and put up Government Exhibit MER 1204, please. If we could go to the second page, and if we could blow up the message that starts, there's no universe. You see that?
Yes, sir.
So you sent that message on March 17th, 2022.
Yes, sir.
You sent this message before the letter we just looked at was submitted to OCIF.
Yes, sir.
Nothing about your conversation with Mr. J about carrying $100 million of BitGo on a thumb drive to Dubai caused you to cancel that transaction with Hamilton. Correct?
No.
And you didn't report this request to OCIF, right?
Well, I'm not sure we have an obligation to report it to OCIF. But we have an obligation to report it on SARS.
I'm not asking about your legal understanding of anything. I'm just asking the fact of it is that you did not submit it OCIF.
Yes.
Let's pull up Government Exhibit GX-MER 138. We can publish that as well. This is the bank statement that shows the loan going out, right?
I believe so.
So it's fair to say that your conversation with Mr. J about the loan going out occurred before this transaction. Right?
Yes.
And the wire goes out April 15th of 2022, correct? If you go down to where it says withdrawal 37 million.
Looks like April 15th.
So the loan also went out before the OCIF letter that we just looked at was submitted, correct?
Correct.
And nothing about this loan request made you cancel the transaction with Hamilton, correct?
Correct.
You didn't report the loan to OCIF either, did you?
I don't recall what we did or didn't report, but it doesn't come to mind.
We can take that down. Now, you were asked a question on direct about a phrase. To the moon, right?
Yes.
And you saw a video with Mr. Gov't when which that phrase was used, correct?
Yes.
And you described it as marketing material basically, right?
Yes.
And I think you said that the phrase, to the moon, originally came from an old black and white TV show. Right?
Yeah, I think it was the Honeymooners.
That's what I was going to ask. It was the Honeymooners, right?
Yes.
It's a common phrase in the cryptocurrency industry, right?
Yes.
Mr. Gov't is not the only person who's ever used that phrase, right?
No.
Elon Musk used that phrase about Dogecoin, correct?
Mr. Finkel said, objection.
I don't know.
The court said, sustained.
You heard that phrase in the course of your following the cryptocurrency industry, correct?
Yes.
And Mercantile Bank, I understand it's winding down, withdrawn. Mercantile Bank was a bank based in Puerto Rico, right?
Yes.
When was it founded?
I believe we received our license to organize around December of 16, I'm sorry. December of 18, and we began operating in the spring of 19.
Now, prior to founding Mercantile Bank, you were also looking at starting a cryptocurrency exchange. Right?
That was part of our original plan.
And you were going to call it the San Juan Mercantile Exchange, right?
Correct.
What is your understanding of what a cryptocurrency is?
Mr. Finkel said, objection.
The court said, Overruled. When you say that it was contemplated that you may start such an entity, are you speaking of yourself personally or the bank?
The witness said, the holding company. So Mercantile Global Holdings owned two. At that time we owned two assets. One was a bank and the other was what we called San Juan Mercantile Exchange. And the two were meant to operate together.
The court said, you may answer the question as to what your understanding of a cryptocurrency exchange is.
A cryptocurrency exchange matches buyers and sellers of a given crypto asset. Usually for some fiat currency. Sometimes for a different crypto asset.
Now, the San Juan Mercantile Exchange never actually launched, correct?
Correct.
But Mercantile the bank did have a cryptocurrency focus, correct?
Correct.
And I think you testified on direct that your vision for the bank was that it would be a settlement bank to the digital asset industry. You remember that?
Yes.
What's a settlement bank?
A settlement bank means that we are facilitating a clearing of funds related to transactions on an exchange.
So that, if I understand you correctly, the clearing of those funds occurs after there's a transaction on the exchange, is that right?
It depends on how the transaction's being handled. But it could be described as contemporaneous, but either instantly or soon thereafter.
And that's what you mean by settlement, right?
Correct.
You also testified that Mercantile was the first bank in the U.S. to have a license to hold and transmit digital assets. Correct?
Correct.
What do you mean by hold and transmit digital assets?
We could custody your digital assets. So let's just use Bitcoin as an example. If you wanted to deposit Bitcoin with our bank, we could hold that asset in custody for you. We could also transmit it.
And that's one of the offerings that your bank marketed, right?
Yes.
And I think you testified on direct that there are 20,000 cryptocurrencies to your knowledge.
I've lost track of the number.
Fair to say thousands.
At least.
And so would your bank provide custody services for all of those?
No.
Why might your bank not provide custody services for a cryptocurrency asset?
That industry is rife with projects that won't succeed. There are some projects that are not cognizant of laws that we have to follow. And quite frankly, from a commercial perspective, there's just not enough business in 99% of the coins.
The interpreter said, Your Honor, interpreter is requesting all parties to slow down a little bit.
The court said, please slow down both the questioner and the witness.
Mr. Kamraju said, understood, Your Honor.
I'll start over. There are dubious projects in crypto that are problematic that don't necessarily respect the laws of our jurisdiction. And then there are commercial concerns about the effort to onboard a specific coin as it relates to just economic activity.
And so your bank picks and chooses between which cryptocurrencies it will service, for lack of a better word, after evaluating those factors. Correct?
Correct.
You also testified that Mercantile was a corresponding bank. Do you remember that?
We had one corresponding relationship.
What does that mean? What is a corresponding bank?
Typically that just means that two banks have accounts with each other.
And correspondent banking is often used when you have transactions in different currencies, right?
That's one purpose, yeah.
Can you explain how that would work to the jury?
So I'll try to create a simple example. I think that's the easiest way to consider it. If JP Morgan has a client that owns dollars and needs to purchase industrial equipment in Germany that has to be transacted in euros, then often they will use a bank account that they have with a bank in Germany where they keep money in both dollars and euros, and they'll simply accept money from their client in the United States in dollars, and then they will make the payment to the German manufacturer out of the German corresponding account that JP Morgan has in euros. So there's a simultaneous transmission of value and an exchange between one currency and the other. So it's the most efficient way to manage international multi-currency transactions.
Right. And that's because a bank user, example JP Morgan and the United States, may not just be able to send euros from New York to Berlin, right?
Yes, fair enough.
And for an international banking institution like Mercantile, having corresponding relationships that allowed US dollar transactions was pretty significant, right?
Yes. We did not have a direct account with a Federal Reserve. So we depended on our own bank accounts with other banks to facilitate transactions on behalf of our clients.
I'm going to come back to the Federal Reserve. At the time that G Clubs became a client, you had a correspondent banking relationship with Medici Bank, correct?
Yes.
But Medici wasn't the first correspondent banking relationship that Mercantile had entered into, right?
We had other accounts at other banks that I guess you could describe as corresponding banks.
Well, you had a corresponding banking relationship with Signature Bank, right?
Correct.
And when you did that, Mercantile was processing transactions for.
No. No. I'm sorry. I misstated that. I don't believe we had an account. Our account with Signature Bank, I believe, was purely an operating account, which is different from a corresponding account.
Are you familiar with a company called Bitrex?
Yes.
Was Bitrex ever a client at Mercantile Bank?
Briefly.
Did you use Signature Bank to process transactions on behalf of Bitrex?
Mr. Finkel said, objection, 401, 403.
The court said, "You'll step up, please."
Continued on next page. At the sidebar,
The court said, "How is all of this relevant?"
Mr. Kamaraju said, I don't have a lot of questions. I'm just trying to clarify the kind of account. My understanding from his 3,500 material was that this client Bitrex was using Mercantile to do corresponding banking transactions through Signature. So I'm just trying to clarify that. I don't intend to dwell on this topic at all.
The court said, "Why is it relevant?"
Mr. Kamaraju said, well, corresponding banking relationships are relevant, that's all. Because he goes from here to, he loses this banking relationship. He then struggles to find another corresponding banking relationship. It's his belief that that has, 1. to do with the fact that the bank is in Puerto Rico. And 2, it has to do with cryptocurrency. Just establishing that in fact it can be difficult to establish banking relationships. The issue of that is going to be relevant throughout the trial.
Mr. Finkel said, I don't see how Mercantile's relationships with other customers is relevant. In particular, a customer like Bitrex. The defense moved to make sure that Mr. Collins was not used as a pseudo-cryptocurrency expert. That's why I objected to the question about the cryptocurrency exchanges initially. That question in and of itself was fine. I was worried about the line had been drawn. I think if the defense is trying to use Mercantile's relationships with other clients, particularly crypto clients like Bitrex, to try to draw comparisons and parallels to the Himalaya exchange, that's inappropriate. That's a 403 problem. It's a 702 problem, but the relevance question I think predominates. While there has been evidence at this trial about the difficulty of G clubs, for example, or GW's enterprise to obtain banking relationships, Bitrex's ability to obtain banking relationships is not relevant at all to this trial. And it wouldn't be appropriate to draw a comparison between entities in the GW enterprise and Bitrex. And that's the only possible relevance to that question. To the extent it is relevant, it would be confusing to the jury.
The court said, "What is Bitrex?"
Mr. Kamaraju said, it's a cryptocurrency exchange.
The court said, "Is this one of those widely considered legitimate exchanges?"
Mr. Finkel said, yes.
Mr. Kamaraju said, it is. But, first of all, it's not Bitrex that has the difficulty with maintaining banking relationships. It's Mercantile. I have no intention of suggesting anything about Bitrex's banking relationships or comparing the exchange to Bitrex. I just understood that it was a corresponding banking relationship that he had with Signature. He told me it wasn't. I was trying to clarify that through at least what was in the 3500. I don't intend to either here or during summation to say anything about the fact that Bitrex. The fact that Bitrex was a client of Mercantile has anything to do with the exchange. I'm literally just trying to get to point of Mercantile's own banking relationships, not Bitrex.
Mr. Finkel said, then the question should be, did Mercantile have problems obtaining corresponding banking relationships? By that description itself, I think basically concedes that Bitrex's point has no relevance. Because the point can be made without Bitrex. The only reason I objected is because of the Bitrex reference.
Mr. Kamraju said, I only responded to the fact that the witness said there was a corresponding banking relationship. I was just trying to get back to that. If you want, I'll ask that question if that's the only reason for asking about Bitrex.
The court said, I think that's a better question.
Mr. Kamraju said, that's fine, Your Honor. I would just note that the witnesses sometimes have difficulty with longer questions or more generalized questions. Which is why I was trying to more specific in the first instance.
The court said, all righty.
Continued on next page. In open court, jury present.
The court said, sustained.
By Mr. Kamraju.
Did there come a point where Mercantile Bank had difficulties obtaining corresponding banking relationships?
Yes, we always tried to maintain more than one. And corresponding banking is difficult at best.
And it's particularly difficult for banks based in Puerto Rico, correct?
I believe so.
And it's particularly difficulty for withdrawn. What is your understanding as to why it's difficult for banks based in Puerto Rico to obtain corresponding banking relationships?
There's a perception bias. I can't say I'm an expert on what drives the bias. But at the end of the day, it's human beings making a decision. That would be mostly the issue, I think.
And banks that primarily service cryptocurrency clients, do they similarly have problems obtaining corresponding banking relationship?
Mr. Finkel said, objection.
The court said, I'll allow the question.
Yes.
And what's your understanding of why that is?
Mr. Finkel said, same objection as to other banks.
The court said, so you're asking about banks based in Puerto Rico. What is the question?
Mr. Kamraju said, I asked about banks based in Puerto Rico. Now I'm asking about banks that predominantly facilitate cryptocurrency customers.
The court said, if you'll just stick to his bank.
Mr. Kamraju said, sure. Mercantile is a bank that had a focus on cryptocurrency, correct?
Correct.
And that was one of the factors that you believed made it difficult for Mercantile to obtain corresponding banking relationships. Correct?
Correct.
Why did you believe that?
Because it was shared with us by corresponding banks that we had made applications to.
By the way, do you know what Sharps Pixley?
Sharps Pixley. Can you spell Sharps?
Common spelling, SRPS.
And Pixley?
Pixley.
I'm not sure I'm familiar with that term.
You do know what FV Bank is, right?
Yes.
FV Bank is another bank in Puerto Rico, right?
Yes.
And its offices are close to Mercantile offices, right?
I don't actually know where their offices are.
Fair enough. Now, you testified on direct that you were first introduced to G Club through an individual called Alex H., right?
No.
Who introduced you first to G Club?
Our introduction came through essentially Medici because we were processing transactions for Medici, who was processing transactions for G Club.
After Medici made that introduction, you had a meeting at your home with Ana Izquierdo and Limari Reyes. Right?
Yes.
And you understand they were executives at G Club?
Yes.
Why was that meeting at your home?
It was convenient for me at the time. My office, I believe this was not, we were still in a strange environment related to COVID. And it was just more convenient for me to meet there.
And I think you testified on direct that the Chinese Communist Party did not come up during that meeting. right?
Yeah, I don't recall it.
But you also testified on direct that you had a discussion with Ms. Reyes and Ms. Izquierdo that there was a Chinese diaspora of like-minded people that were interested in these types of offerings. Do you remember that?
Yes.
What do you mean Chinese diaspora?
Generally, I mean by that Chinese either current or former citizens who left China that reside somewhere else.
And when you use the phrase, like-minded people, what do you mean by that?
People that wanted to leave China because of the political system.
When you talk about these types of offerings, you refer to G Club offerings, right?
Can you state that question again?
Sure. The types of offerings that members of the Chinese diaspora that you were describing. Those were the offerings that G Clubs was marketing, correct?
Yes.
Now, at the time that you met with Ms. Reyes, they were looking to switch banks, fair enough.
Yes.
They were no longer satisfied with Medici services, correct?
Yes.
And they ultimately did make that switch, right?
Yes.
Did they explain to you why they were not satisfied with Medici?
They didn't like the amount of communication and they felt the technology was not sufficient.
Now, once Mercantile opened the G Club bank accounts, there were millions of dollars that flowed into those accounts, right?
I can't recall the timeline of transactions. I believe the bulk of those transactions happened before we had a direct relationship with G Clubs.
Fair enough. Regardless of before or after Medici, there was millions of dollars flowing into G Club's accounts held at Mercantile, correct?
Yes.
How does Mercantile earn revenue from its banking business?
Usually we earn money through transaction fees and through an interest rate spread. Because for digital assets, typically banks don't pay any interest on the funds.
So if there are US dollars sitting in a bank account at Mercantile, can you explain to us how Mercantile might make money off of that?
We deposit that in short-term overnight funds with AA-rated banks. And we receive essentially the Fed funds rate. And that I don't remember the exact rate at the time. But since we started the bank, that's ranged from 1% to as high as 5.25%.
And so the more money that's in an account, the more money the bank earns, right?
Correct.
So the bank earned those same payments off the G Club's inflows, right?
Yes.
And on direct you were asked questions about the due diligence process that Mercantile engaged in with new clients. Remember that?
Millimeter HM.
You testified that you understood that that kind of due diligence was required under the Bank Secrecy Act. Correct?
Yes.
And part of that process is determining who the UBO is, right?
Yes.
Tell us again what UBO stands for.
Ultimate beneficial owner.
How does Mercantile determine typically who the UBO is?
So we have a compliance team that collects data. They evaluate the data. They ask people to make certain attestations about what percentage they own of a company, what control they have. And based on those answers, they make an evaluation.
And you testified on direct that another part of the due diligence process was determining the source of funds. Right?
Yes.
So same question. How does Mercantile determine the source of funds coming in from a potential client typically?
That's a more complicated process that involves a lot of research that my team takes care of. I'm not an expert in that.
You have a team at the bank who's responsible for doing that.
Right.
Now, you are aware at the time G Club was seeking to open bank accounts that there was a relationship or a connection between G Clubs and Miles Gov't. Right?
Yes.
And you testified on direct that you had concerns about that connection. And in particular Mr. Gov't based on risk profile and his history with the Chinese government, right?
Yes.
What did you mean by his history with the Chinese government?
My understanding was he had been accused of criminal activity. That he had fled the country and was seeking asylum or was granted asylum in the US. And that is quite frankly too much information for us to unpack.
I didn't hear the last part.
Too much information for us to unpack.
And by unpack, you mean that was enough for the bank basically?
To make a determination if it was true, what crimes had been committed or not committed. Like it's a very complicated situation. And we took the more conservative position that that was a risk profile we could not tolerate.
And that risk profile would be problematic for the bank if Mr. Gov't was the UBO of G Club, right?
Yes.
And it would be problematic for the bank if the source of G Club's money was Mr. Gov't, correct?
Correct.
And so the bank did in fact run its due diligence process on G Clubs, correct?
Correct.
And you have no reason to believe that that process was any different than what it runs on any of its other customers. Right?
Correct.
You don't believe the bank took it easy on G Club, right?
Correct.
And as a result that due diligence process revealed that Mr. Gov't was not the UBO, correct?
As far as our research concluded, that's the case.
And same with respect to the source of funds, it concluded that they did not come from him, correct?
That is true.
You also testified about the same thing with respect to G Fashion, right?
I believe so.
So you open accounts for G Fashion, correct?
Yes.
You had the same concerns with respect to G Fashion and its connection to Mr. Gov't, right?
Correct.
The bank ran due diligence on G Fashion, correct?
Correct.
And as a result of its due diligence, it opened accounts for G Fashion, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Finkel asked you a number of questions about if the bank had known that Mr. Gov't had operational control of G Club. Would the bank had opened the account, correct? You remember those questions?
Yes.
So at the time that the bank opened the G Club account, the bank concluded that Mr. Gov't did not have operational control of G Club, correct?
Correct.
And it determined that he did not have operational control of G Fashion, correct?
Correct.
And sitting here today, you have never seen any evidence that he has operational control of G Club. Correct?
Correct.
And you have never seen any evidence sitting here today that he has operational control of G Fashion. Correct?
Correct.
And you have never seen any evidence sitting here today that he has operational control of Himalaya Exchange. Correct?
Correct.
And, in fact, during all of your negotiations with Mr. J.E., whether it was about the acquisition, the loans, the redemption request, you never communicated with this man Mr. Gov't, correct?
Correct.
In fact, you have never spoken to Mr. Gov't, right?
Not to my knowledge.
Sitting here in this courtroom is the first time you've ever seen him in person, right?
Correct.
Now, I like to talk about yield esta. Can you remind us what yield esta is? Am I saying that right first?
Yield esta, yes.
Can you remind us what it is?
It was an investment vehicle for futures trading based on algorithmic programs.
When you say investment vehicle, is that another word for hedge fund?
I wouldn't describe this as a hedge fund, but it's similar.
The court said, Mr. Kamaraju, if you would spell out what it is you're describing.
So it's yield esta. Correct me if I'm wrong, YELDSTA. Is that right, sir?
It's the word yield with esta.
The court said, if you'll speak into the microphone, please.
It's the word yield with esta on it.
The court said, go ahead.
And you just mentioned it was focused on algorithmic trading?
Yes.
I'm not going to dive into the details of it. I want to say, is it fair to say that algorithmic trading is an investment strategy of some sort?
Yes.
And it's the investment strategy that yield esta employs, right?
Yes.
When you say it's focused on futures trading, a future is just a particular kind of asset class, right?
Correct.
So yield esta employs a particular investment strategy tied to a particular asset class, right?
Correct.
And who sets the strategy, for that investment strategy for yield ESTA.
I did.
It wasn't the folks at G Clubs who invested that set the strategy, right?
No.
Are you a registered investment advisor, sir?
No, I don't have to be.
I wasn't asking about the obligation. When G Clubs invested in yield ESTA, you provided them certain information about the, I'll use investment your term, investment vehicle, right?
Correct.
They decided if they wanted to invest, right?
Correct.
They sent you subscription documents, right?
Yes.
They sent you money, right?
Yes.
And, in fact, they sent you money before they were even allowed to open accounts at the bank, right?
I don't remember that.
Withdrawn. Once G Club sent the money to you, it was your decision how to invest it though, right?
Yes.
And you do have experience advising clients on investments, right?
Yes.
You worked at a fund before, right?
Yes.
Before you got into the banking space.
Yes.
What was the name of that fund?
Mother Rock.
Now, after G Clubs had opened its accounts, we'll stick with Alex H. Alex H suggested that you should meet another potential client, right?
Yes.
And that was the cryptocurrency exchange Himalaya Exchange, right?
Yes.
And I think you testified that was in late summer or early fall of 2021, right?
Yes.
So the exchange was not up and running yet at this time, right?
No.
It was still in developmental phases, right?
We had not pursued plans to launch the exchange very early in our process.
I'm sorry. I think I may have confused you with my question. I was referring to the Himalaya Exchange was not up and running by the late summer of 2021.
I don't think so.
How many, again, I'm not asking for names. Was it unusual for you to have a cryptocurrency exchange as a client?
No.
So you had others, right?
Over time. Timeline is important in all these questions.
Fair enough. And I'm not trying to pin you down to anything. Prior to beginning to engage with the exchange, Mercantile had had other exchanges as clients in the past. That's my question.
Yes.
Now, at the time you first learned of the Himalaya Exchange, Mercantile was experiencing a bit of a cash crunch, right?
Yes.
And you had been trying to raise money to keep the bank's operations going, right?
Correct.
And you were telling potential investors that you needed cash to keep the bank going, right?
Yes.
And one of the investors that you, let's say, recorded for lack of a better phrase, was a company called Tingo, right?
Yes.
What is Tingo?
At the time I understood Tingo to be a company doing commodity transactions in Europe and Africa who had ambitions to go public.
Based on what you knew at the time, so I'm just asking for what you knew, sir. Did you know if Tingo had any cryptocurrency operations?
Mr. Finkel said, objection, pertains to what we talked about at the sidebar.
The court said, sustained.
Mr. Kamaraju said, could I have a very brief sidebar on this, Your Honor?
The court said, okay.
Continued on next page. At the sidebar.
Mr. Kamaraju said, so the only reason I ask that is because the timeline, as I understand it is. He is discussing a transaction with Tingo. He then meets William J.E., and William J.E. proposes a transaction. And he opts to go with William J.E.'s transaction over Tingo. Including in part because his bank and the exchange had synergies, on the cryptocurrency front. The only reason I was asking about Tingo was to point out that he switched courses so to speak mid-race to go with the company that better fit his business. That's the entire point.
The court said, I think it's understood that a bank may be courting a number of clients or a number of clients may be looking to open accounts with the bank. I don't see why you need to specifically go into Tingo.
Mr. Kamaraju said, I'm not going into Tingo. The only reason, my point is not that there's a bunch of different suitors for the bank. My point is actually that he picked the suitor. He had the choice and he picked the suitor that best suited his interest.
The court said, you don't need to make that point by comparing it to an entity that's not relevant to this case. You can ask him why did he pick.
Mr. Kamaraju said, okay. But if his answer is why did you pick and he sells, well, Tingo didn't have cryptocurrency capability and the exchange does, then are we in the same place?
The court said, then you can go into Tingo.
Continued on next page. In open court, jury present. By Mr. Kamaraju.
So, Mr. Collins. We were talking about the fact that you were discussing a potential transaction with Tingo, right?
Yes.
And in November of 2021, you traveled to London to meet with them?
Yes.
At the same time you also met with Mr. J.E., right?
Mr. Finkel said, objection.
The court said, sustained.
In November of 2021 you traveled to London, right?
Yes.
You met Mr. J.E. there, right?
Yes.
You decided to engage in a commercial transaction with Mr. J.E.'s companies, right?
Yes.
Why did you pick Mr. J.E.'s companies as opposed to any other potential suitors the bank might have had?
In part my memory was they improved the price. I believed them to be liquid. I was unclear of Tingo's liquid. Tingo is still evolving relative to their public ambition, which was interest but pose some risk. I would say those are the major factors.
Now, just stick with your meeting with Mr. J.E. for a second please. So you testified on direct that he ran the Himalaya exchange, right?
Yes.
And you visited his office in London during this trip?
It's a suburb of London, but yes.
Those offices occupied several floors of a building, right?
I don't recall being on more than one floor.
You testified that there was an arbitration, correct?
Where are we in the timeline?
Well, you testified on direct that the bank filed an arbitration against Hamilton, correct?
Correct.
And you submitted a declaration in that arbitration, correct?
I don't recall the documents that were part of it.
How many sworn statements do you recall submitting in connection with that arbitration?
I have no idea.
Was it more than one?
I don't know.
Did you testify in the arbitration?
I believe I did.
Prior to testifying in the arbitration, did you submit any sworn statements?
I don't recall.
Just for the witness, could we show him DX60551, please? Could we just scroll through it, please? If we could go to page 19, please. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
Is this the declaration you submitted in connection with the arbitration?
I believe so.
Could we turn to page 8 and highlight paragraph? Just the last sentence of paragraph 46 and please just read it to yourself, sir.
The court said, so it's now 11:30, so we will take our break. Members of the jury, remember that you're not allowed to discuss the case amongst yourselves, or with anyone else. Don't permit anyone to discuss the case in your presence. Don't read, watch or listen to anything from any source about anything that touches upon the subject matter of this trial. Sir, you may step out. Don't discuss your testimony.
The law clerk said, jury exiting.
The court said, you may be seated. You may step out, sir.
Witness temporarily excused. Continued on next page. Jury not present.
The court said, is there anything before we resume at noon?
Mr. Kamaraju said, nothing from the defense.
Mr. Finkel said, just to avoid a sidebar when we resume. I think defense counsel is going to a proper place with the declaration, which is either to refresh his recollection or impeach. But to the extent the defense is seeking to introduce the 20-page declaration, we would object to that. And we can settle that not at a sidebar. It seems like we're going to a proper place, but too efficient. I just wanted to put that on the record.
Mr. Kamaraju said, I don't plan to try to admit the declaration. I was going to try to use it for refresh his recollection. I guess possibly impeach him. To the extent it is used for impeachment. I think what I will do if it makes sense to your honor is simply ask to admit the specific statement that is reflected in the declaration and only publish that statement to the jury. And then we can have a redacted version down the road before it goes to the jury. That's what I would propose.
The court said, "That seems appropriate."
Mr. Finkel said, "Thank you."
Mr. Kamraju said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
Recess.